I've always been the afterthought in my family. My older sister, Rachel, 30, has been the golden child since she took her first breath. Honestly, if they gave awards for being the favorite, her trophy case would need reinforcement by now. Growing up in Rachel's shadow wasn't easy. She could present a half-burned cake, and my parents would declare her the next culinary genius. Meanwhile, I, 25, could ace every exam, and all I'd get was a distracted, "That's nice, Mia. Did you hear Rachel just got promoted to team lead?" To be fair, Rachel isn't completely awful, at least not all the time. She just walks into every room like she owns it, and my parents reinforce this behavior at every turn. She's intelligent, successful, and married to Tyler, who's essentially her personal cheerleader. They're the human equivalent of those perfect Instagram couples, flawless from the outside but scratched beneath the surface, and you'll find a mountain of entitlement. Everything came to a head last summer when I returned from grad school for break. I was already exhausted from balancing 2 part-time jobs while maintaining my grades. Grad school isn't cheap, and while my parents contributed a little to my education, it was nothing compared to what Rachel received. They covered her entire college experience, dorm, allowance, even a new car. For me, it was more like, "Good luck, kiddo. Hope you figure it out." I arrived home hoping for a quiet few weeks to decompress. The second I walked through the door, I could feel what I privately call the Rachel effect in full force. Mom gave me a quick 2-second hug before rushing back to the kitchen, undoubtedly checking on whatever special dish she was preparing. Dad offered his trademark awkward back pat before disappearing into the living room. Then Rachel made her entrance, breezing in like royalty with Tyler trailing behind carrying their luggage. Apparently, they were staying the week too. "Hey, little sis," Rachel said, flashing her perfect smile. "Hey, Rachel," I replied, forcing myself to smile back. Tyler acknowledged me with a nod. He's not a bad guy, just there, following Rachel around like a lost puppy, agreeing with everything she says. Dinner that evening was classic Rachel worship. Mom pulled out her fancy lace tablecloth, the one reserved exclusively for Rachel's visits, and prepared a 3-course meal. I'm not exaggerating. For Rachel, steak and roasted vegetables. For me, there are leftovers in the fridge, Mia. We were halfway through the meal when Rachel set down her fork and leaned back like she was preparing to deliver a keynote speech. "So," she began, "Tyler and I have been working incredibly hard, and we deserve a break." We thought, what better way to relax than a family trip to Hawaii? Mom gasped and clapped like a child receiving a surprise gift. "Oh, Rachel, that's such a wonderful idea. Isn't it, honey?" Dad nodded enthusiastically. "Fantastic idea, sweetheart." I sat there, chewing my green beans, waiting for someone to ask for my opinion. Then Rachel turned to me, her smile morphing into something sharper. "Mia, do you think you can afford it? Or should your big sister cover your share?" The room went silent. Even Tyler paused mid-chew. My face burned with embarrassment, but I kept my voice steady. "I can manage, thanks." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "It's going to be around $5,000 per person. Flights, hotels, activities. It all adds up. I just don't want you to feel left out if you can't swing it." I nearly choked on my water. $5,000? That was more than all my savings combined, and I was only making minimum wage at my part-time jobs. But I'd rather survive on ramen for 6 months than accept Rachel's charity. "I can manage," I repeated firmly. "Okay, if you say so," Rachel shrugged, turning back to our parents and completely ignoring me. "So we were thinking of staying at this gorgeous beachfront resort. It's all inclusive, of course, and there's a spa. Oh, and Tyler found this amazing helicopter tour we just have to do." Mom was practically vibrating with excitement. "That sounds incredible, Rachel. We've never been to Hawaii before." Dad nodded in agreement. "You two always have such great ideas." Rachel smiled like she'd just won an award. "Well, you know, Tyler and I are used to organizing things. It comes with running a business." And there it was, the obligatory mention of their restaurant. It never took long for Rachel to bring it up. "It's been a lot of work," she continued, "but it's paying off. We've got a loyal customer base, amazing reviews, and we just hired another chef last month." "That's incredible," Mom gushed. "Mia, you should really learn from your sister. She's so driven. You could pick up a few tips from her about setting goals and following through." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. The rest of dinner followed the same pattern. Rachel talking about her and Tyler's hard work. Mom and Dad hanging on every word, and me sitting there feeling like an extra in a play about their perfect little family. After dinner, Rachel cornered me in the hallway. "So," she said, crossing her arms, "are you really coming? Or is this going to be one of those things where you back out at the last minute because it's too expensive?" "I'm coming," I said, clenching my fists. She gave me that smirk again. "Good. I'd hate for you to miss out. Just don't embarrass yourself, okay? I mean, it's Hawaii. You don't want to be stuck eating sandwiches while the rest of us are enjoying the nice restaurants." I didn't respond, just nodded and walked away, already planning how I would prove her wrong. That interaction with Rachel stayed with me long after I retreated to my room that night. I pretended to study, but I was mostly stewing in frustration. My sister's entire personality seemed built on one-upping me, and somehow no one ever called her out on it. Every word from her mouth was either a brag or a backhanded comment. I was determined to save for this Hawaii trip, not just to prove Rachel wrong, but because I was sick of being treated like the poor kid who didn't belong. Yet that dinner left me feeling like I was 10 years old again. Nothing had changed. The same eager nods from Mom, the same proud smile on Dad's face, the same feeling of invisibility. Rachel was still their golden child, just as she'd been since childhood. The 5 years between us might as well have been 50 for all the difference it made in how our parents perceived us. They never stated it outright, but their actions spoke volumes. Rachel was the one they believed in. Thank goodness for Grandpa William. He was the only family member who ever made me feel like I mattered. While Rachel had Mom and Dad wrapped around her finger, Grandpa treated me like I was just as important as her, maybe even more so. He'd always pull me aside at family gatherings, slip me a 20, and whisper, "Don't let your sister steal all the attention, kiddo. You're special too." Grandpa was successful in his own right, a businessman who worked his way up from nothing. He had this beautiful old house on Cedar Street with a wraparound porch and a backyard that seemed endless. It was my favorite place growing up. He'd let me sit on the porch swing and listen to his stories about building his business or meeting Grandma. Rachel would constantly say the house was outdated and needed a serious renovation, but to me, it was perfect. Sure, the paint peeled in spots and the floors creaked, but it felt like home in a way my parents' house never did. When Grandpa passed away during my second year of grad school, it devastated me. I was sitting in my apartment when Mom called, her voice shaking as she said, "Grandpa's gone." I couldn't even respond. It felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. The funeral was small and quiet, just as he would have wanted. It was held on an overcast day, the kind where the sky threatens to pour at any moment. Rachel arrived in a sleek black dress that probably cost more than my laptop, clinging to Tyler, while Mom and Dad hovered, ensuring she had everything she needed. Meanwhile, I sat near the back, feeling like an outsider even at my own grandfather's funeral. After the service, we gathered at the attorney's office for the will reading. I wasn't expecting much. Grandpa wasn't one to flaunt his wealth, and I assumed whatever he had would go to my parents. But when the attorney began reading, I realized just how thoughtfully Grandpa had planned everything. "To my daughter Catherine," the attorney began, "I leave the sum of $25,000. Mom nodded, dabbing her eyes with a tissue as if she'd anticipated this outcome. "To my granddaughter Rachel," the attorney continued, "I leave the sum of $150,000. Rachel's eyes lit up. She turned to Tyler and whispered something I couldn't hear, but it didn't take genius to guess. She was already planning how to spend it. Then the attorney looked at me. "And to my granddaughter Mia, I leave my house on Cedar Street, including all its contents and surrounding property." The room fell silent. Rachel broke it first with a laugh. "Wait, what? Mia gets the old house?" She actually laughed out loud as if it were the funniest joke. Wow, okay, sure. Enjoy that, Mia. Maybe you can sell it and buy yourself something decent to wear." Mom shushed her but didn't sound genuinely upset. "Rachel, don't be rude," she said, though she was smiling. I remained silent, too stunned to respond. I wasn't sure how to feel. On one hand, I loved that house. It was the one place that had always felt safe, and knowing Grandpa had left it to me made me feel like he still believed in me, even after he was gone. On the other hand, I was a struggling grad student. Houses aren't cheap to maintain, and I knew the property taxes alone would be challenging. Still, I thanked the attorney, accepted the keys, and promised myself I'd figure it out. Grandpa had trusted me with this, and I wouldn't let him down. Over the next few months, I visited the house whenever possible. It wasn't in perfect condition, some pipes needed fixing, and the roof had a small leak, but it still felt like Grandpa was there. His fishing rods remained propped in the living room corner, and his favorite leather chair sat exactly where he'd left it. Of course, Rachel couldn't leave it alone. Every time she visited, she'd make snide comments about how outdated everything was. "You should just sell it," she said one afternoon, lounging on the couch like she owned the place. "I mean, what are you even going to do with a house like this? You can't afford to fix it up. And honestly, it's kind of a dump." I bit my tongue, as I always did around her. Then suddenly, Rachel wanted to stay at the house, the same one she kept mocking. Tyler and I were thinking we could stay at the house for a bit while we sort some things out with the restaurant, she announced. My stomach sank. I knew that tone. It wasn't a question, but a statement disguised as one. "I don't know," I started, trying to stay neutral. "It's just until things settle down," Rachel added quickly, flashing her perfect smile. "The restaurant's been crazy and we just need a breather." Tyler, standing behind her, nodded like a backup dancer. "Yeah, it's only temporary, a couple of months, max." Before I could respond, Mom chimed in from the kitchen. "Oh, Mia, don't be selfish. They've got so much on their plate. Your family, you should want to help." I felt cornered. I didn't want them there. Sharing space with Rachel is like being trapped in a competition you never signed up for. But refusing would cast me as the family villain. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "You can stay." At first, it wasn't terrible. They mostly kept to themselves, and I figured they'd leave in a month or two. But weeks became months, and soon they'd taken over the entire house. Tyler filled the garage with tools he barely used. Rachel replaced Grandpa's old armchair with some overpriced monstrosity she called modern chic, and started reorganizing the kitchen like it was her personal domain. The worst part, they weren't paying a single penny in rent. When I tried discussing this with my parents, they brushed me off. "Family helps family, Mia," Mom said, as if that erased my growing frustration. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that they'd leave soon. But deep down, I knew better. Rachel always got what she wanted, and no one ever told her no, not even me. While I studied for finals in my cramped apartment, my sister and her husband lived rent-free in my house. Every time I visited during breaks, I had to request permission to enter what was legally my own property. Let's get back to the present. After that summer dinner, I worked myself to exhaustion, trying to save for the Hawaii trip. Rachel had graciously included me in. Between morning shifts at the campus cafe and evening hours at the library, I barely had time to breathe, let alone enjoy what little life I had. My diet consisted mainly of instant noodles and cheap granola bars, and I hadn't bought anything new in months. But I was determined to go on that trip, if only to prove to Rachel I wasn't the failure she seemed to think I was. By late November, I'd finally saved enough. It wasn't easy, but seeing that $5,000 in my account felt like victory. Rachel called one evening, her tone brisk as if she were doing me a favor by picking up the phone. "We need to finalize the bookings," she said. "Have you got your share ready?" "Yeah," I replied, already opening my banking app. "Good. Transfer it to me tonight. I don't want to risk prices increasing." I sent her the money immediately, my hands trembling slightly as I confirmed the transaction. Watching my account drop back to double digits was nerve-wracking, but it would be worth it. I was finally going to Hawaii to treat myself. December 23rd arrived, and the house buzzed with excitement. Well, Rachel and Mom were buzzing. I was mostly trying to keep up. Rachel kept discussing all her planned activities, dinner cruises, snorkeling trips, spa days. She'd even selected matching outfits for the family photos we'd apparently be taking. The night before departure, I packed my suitcase with a mixture of excitement and relief. After everything I'd endured, I finally felt like I'd earned this trip. But the next morning, things felt off. Mom and Dad were unusually quiet, avoiding eye contact whenever I entered the room. Rachel and Tyler were acting normal, but in that overly casual way people do when hiding something. I tried dismissing it as pre-trip jitters. At breakfast, Rachel cleared her throat, and the room fell silent. "So, before we head out, we need to talk," she said, her tone serious, but with fake sympathy underneath. I set down my fork, already uneasy. "Okay, about what?" Rachel glanced at Tyler, who nodded as if they'd rehearsed this. "The restaurant. Well, we've hit a rough patch. Tyler and I have been running the numbers. and they aren't what we projected. The trip is costing more than expected, so we've had to make some adjustments to the budget. Confused, I felt the entire atmosphere shift. What kind of adjustments? Well, Rachel said, drawing out the word as if softening a blow. We've decided it's best if you don't come with us. Your contribution is helping cover the rest of our costs. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, but she wasn't joking. What? I finally managed. Rachel sighed as if this were difficult for her. It's nothing personal, Mia. It's just that Tyler and I never had a proper honeymoon, and this trip is really important for us. You understand, right? Wait, I said, my voice shaking. I already paid my share. I worked double shifts for months to save for this. Mom jumped in, her tone overly patient as if explaining to a child. Mia, you have to understand. Rachel and Tyler are under tremendous stress with the restaurant. This trip is their chance to recharge. Family helps family. But I'm family too, I said, my voice rising. I paid for this trip just like everyone else. How is it fair that I get left behind? Dad avoided my gaze, staring at his coffee mug like it held all life's answers. Rachel, meanwhile, simply shrugged. Life isn't always fair, Mia. Besides, someone needs to stay back and watch the house. That was it. Their big justification for stealing my money and excluding me from the trip. I was so angry I could barely see straight, but arguing was pointless. Mom and Dad were firmly on Rachel's side, as always. I retreated to my room and spent the rest of the day there, listening to suitcases being zipped and last-minute plans being finalized. No one checked on me, not even Mom. By evening, I'd made my decision. The next morning, I woke early and joined them on the porch as they loaded luggage into the taxi. Rachel was in high spirits, chatting about resort amenities and Instagram-worthy moments she'd planned. Tyler nodded along as he loaded bags. Don't forget to water the plants, Mom said, as she climbed into the taxi, and check the mail every day. Rachel leaned out the window, flashing a smile that was anything but friendly. We'll send you pictures so you don't feel too left out, she laughed. I waved and smiled, playing my part perfectly. Have a great trip, I called as the taxi departed. As soon as they turned the corner, I dropped the act. I definitely wasn't letting them get away with this, and I knew exactly what to do. The moment their taxi disappeared around the corner, I went inside, grabbed my keys, and drove straight to Grandpa's house, my house. I had spent the past year biting my tongue, staying quiet while Rachel and Tyler treated my inheritance like their personal kingdom. But after what they'd pulled with the Hawaii trip, I was done playing nice. Walking through the front door felt surreal. The place barely resembled Grandpa's house anymore. Rachel had replaced almost everything, from the furniture to the curtains. The warm, cozy space I'd loved growing up had been transformed into something cold and impersonal. Even the walls felt wrong, painted in dull grays and whites instead of the soft greens and yellows Grandpa had always preferred. I stood there momentarily, taking it all in, then got to work. First, I gathered every box and suitcase I could find. Rachel and Tyler had left plenty behind, probably assuming no one would dare touch their belongings. I went room by room, methodically packing their designer clothes, overpriced decor, and the little knickknacks Rachel had scattered to make the house hers. Grandpa's old study was hardest to handle. It used to be my favorite room, with its cozy leather chair and bookshelves. Now it was filled with Tyler's junk, random tools, paperwork stacks, and ugly modern art pieces that matched nothing else. I found their important documents in a filing cabinet and packed those too. I wasn't going to throw away anything they might actually need, but I wasn't leaving it there either. If they wanted their stuff, they could retrieve it from storage. By the time I finished packing, the living room was filled with boxes and suitcases. It was satisfying seeing all their things stacked up, like I was finally taking control of something they'd stolen from me. Then I called a moving company. I explained the situation. Yes, it was last minute. Yes, it was Christmas Eve. But I needed everything out as soon as possible. They quoted triple the usual rate, and I didn't even flinch. Just get it done, I told them. While waiting for the movers, I walked through the house once more. With Rachel and Tyler's stuff packed up, it felt a little more like Grandpa's place again. His fishing rods remained in the garage corner, untouched. The old kitchen table with the wobbly leg was still there too. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The movers arrived a few hours later. I directed them to the living room boxes, and they started loading everything into their truck. They worked quickly, probably eager to get home to their families, and within an hour, the house was empty of Rachel and Tyler's presence. After they left, I made one final call to a 24-hour locksmith. I wasn't taking chances. Rachel and Tyler still had keys, and I didn't trust them not to barge back in whenever they wanted. The locksmith arrived just before sunset, and by the time he finished, every lock in the house had been changed. "Anything else you need?" he asked, packing his tools. "No, that's it," I said, handing him a tip. "Thanks for coming out on such short notice." He nodded and left, and I stood in the doorway, staring at the quiet street. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house was truly mine again. That night, I made a simple dinner and sat at the old kitchen table. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice in my mind, telling stories about his childhood or offering life advice. "You did good, kiddo," I imagined him saying. After dinner, I wandered into the living room and sat in the one piece of furniture I'd refused to let Rachel replace, Grandpa's leather chair. It was old and worn, with cracks in the material and a slightly lopsided cushion, but it remained the most comfortable seat in the house. I checked my phone and scrolled through Instagram. As expected, Rachel had already started posting photos from Hawaii. There she was, lounging by the pool with Tyler, both grinning widely. "Living our best lives," the caption read. I rolled my eyes and put my phone away. I wasn't going to let her ruin this moment. Instead, I focused on planning my next steps. I wasn't just going to pack up their stuff and change the locks. I was taking back control of my life. I drafted an email to a property management company I'd researched earlier. If Rachel and Tyler couldn't respect that this was my house, I'd find tenants who could. By the time I finished, it was late and I was exhausted. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could actually sleep. I went upstairs to my old room, the one place Rachel hadn't bothered to change, and collapsed onto the bed. The glow and the dark stars Grandpa and I had stuck to the ceiling years ago were still there, faint but comforting. As I drifted off, I couldn't help feeling satisfied. For once, I wasn't letting Rachel walk all over me. This was my house, my inheritance, and my life, and I was finally reclaiming it all. As expected, the day after Christmas, my phone started buzzing nonstop. First came a couple of texts from Mom asking me to call her, then one from Dad, rare, since he usually lets Mom handle everything. Finally, Rachel chimed in with messages that progressed from annoyed to outright furious. I ignored them all, but when the calls started coming in rapid succession, Mom, Rachel, Mom again, then Dad, I knew I couldn't avoid it much longer. Sighing, I set down my coffee and answered the next call. "What the hell is going on?" Rachel's voice exploded before I could even say hello. "Why are all our things in storage? And why don't our keys work?" I held the phone away from my ear, letting her rant for a solid minute before cutting in. "Because it's my house," I said evenly, "and you've overstayed your welcome." "Your house?" Rachel scoffed. "Are you serious right now? Do you have any idea how inconvenient this is? Tyler and I have been planning this trip for months, and now we come back to this? Inconvenient?" I said, my voice rising despite myself. "You want to talk about inconvenience? Let's discuss how you stole my money, excluded me from the trip I paid for, and left me here to babysit a house you treated like garbage. How's that for inconvenient?" There was a pause just long enough for me to think I'd actually gotten through to her. Then Rachel laughed, a short, sharp sound that made my blood boil. "You're being so dramatic," she said. "It's not like you were actually going to enjoy the trip anyway. You've never been the adventurous type, Mia. We were doing you a favor." "A favor?" I repeated, barely maintaining my composure. "Yeah," Rachel said, as if it were obvious. "And now you're acting like a spoiled brat because we use the money for something important. Family helps family, remember? Funny how that only seems to apply when it benefits you," I shot back. "But sure, Rachel, keep telling yourself you're the victim here." Before she could respond, I hung up. Then Mom called. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but knew she wouldn't stop until I answered. "Mia," she said, her voice sharp and accusatory, "what were you thinking, throwing Rachel and Tyler out like that?" "They're family." "Are they?" I asked, unable to hide the bitterness. "Because they sure didn't act like family when they stole my money I worked hard to earn, and left me behind." "Don't be ridiculous," Mom said. "They didn't steal anything. They needed help, and you were in a position to provide it. You should be proud of that." "Proud?" I repeated, laughing without humor. You want me to be proud of being treated like a doormat? Mom sighed, the way she always did when she thought I was being unreasonable. Mia, you're blowing this out of proportion. Rachel and Tyler are going through a tough time, and you're making it worse by kicking them out. Where are they supposed to go? I don't care, I said flatly. It's not my problem anymore. Of course it's your problem, Mom snapped. You're being selfish, Mia. I didn't raise you to be like this. Selfish? The first said, my voice rising. You want to talk about selfish? How about the fact that Rachel and Tyler lived in my house rent-free for months, trashed the place, then turned around and stole $5,000 from me? Or how about the fact that you and Dad let it happen without saying a word? If anyone here is selfish, it's all of you. That's enough, Mom said, her tone icy. I'm not going to argue with you anymore. Fix this, Mia, now. Before I could respond, she hung up. For the rest of the day, my phone kept buzzing with messages and calls. Mom, Dad, Rachel, even Tyler chimed in with a passive-aggressive text about family loyalty. I ignored them all. By evening, I was emotionally exhausted. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone as it buzzed for what felt like the 100th time. Finally, I picked it up and sent a single message to the family group chat. I'm not fixing anything. The house is mine, and I've made my decision. If you want to talk about loyalty, maybe start by looking in the mirror. Then I put my phone on silent, set it on the table, and walked away. I felt the deep satisfaction of standing up for myself and defending what was rightfully mine. After a week, my constantly buzzing phone finally sat silent on the coffee table. No more calls, no more messages. It was almost eerie, but also liberating. For the first time in years, I wasn't letting my family's drama dictate my life. They could call me selfish or ungrateful all they wanted, but I knew the truth. I wasn't the villain in this story. The next morning, I received an email from the property management company I'd contacted. They'd reviewed the house and had already started lining up potential tenants. Seeing their response felt like a small victory. Rachel and Tyler may have treated my inheritance like a free vacation home, but I wasn't going to let them ruin it forever. By New Year's, the house was officially listed as available for rent. The company assured me they'd handle everything: background checks, maintenance requests, even collecting rent. All I needed to do was step back and let them work. Meanwhile, Rachel and Tyler had moved back in with our parents. I heard about it through family gossip, mostly from my cousin Jessica, who never excelled at keeping secrets. They're staying in your old room, Jessica said during one of our weekly calls. Rachel's already complaining about the lack of closet space, and Tyler keeps hogging the living room TV. Your mom's losing her mind. I couldn't help laughing. It was petty, sure, but after everything Rachel and Tyler had put me through, the thought of them cramped in my childhood bedroom felt like poetic justice. As weeks passed, messages from my family grew less frequent. Mom still called occasionally, but her tone had shifted. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Mia, she said during one of our last conversations, don't you think it's time to let this go? Rachel and Tyler are struggling. They need support right now, and you've turned your back on them. They're not struggling, Mom, I replied. They're just facing consequences for their actions for once. There's a difference, Mom sighed. I just wish you could see things from their perspective. I did, I said, for years, and all it got me was an empty bank account and a house full of their junk. I'm done bending over backward to make everyone else happy. It's time I start thinking about myself for a change. Mom didn't have much to say after that. By mid-February, the house was rented to a young couple, expecting their first child. They loved the place, especially the backyard, and promised to take good care of it. Knowing the house was in good hands brought enormous relief. With the rent covering property taxes and then some, I finally had financial breathing room for the first time in years. I didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. I even saved enough to treat myself to a weekend getaway with friends. Nothing fancy, just a mountain cabin, but exactly what I needed. Meanwhile, Rachel and Tyler weren't faring as smoothly. Jessica kept me updated whether I wanted her to or not. They're driving your parents insane, she said during one call. Rachel's always complaining about how unfair you were, and Tyler just sits there, agreeing with her. I think your dad's about to snap. Good, I said, laughing. Maybe they'll finally experience what it's like dealing with her full time. By spring, Rachel had stopped contacting me entirely. I'd blocked her on Instagram after too many passive-aggressive posts about loyalty and family values, and her calls had ceased. Mom still called occasionally, but even those conversations grew shorter. The funny thing is, I thought I'd feel guilty about it all, cutting ties with my family, standing up to Rachel, reclaiming my house. I thought it would weigh on me, make me second-guess myself, but it didn't. If anything, I felt lighter. One night, sitting on my apartment balcony sipping tea, I found myself thinking about Grandpa. I wondered what he would say if he could see me now. "I'm proud of you, kiddo," I imagined him saying, just as he used to when I was young. For the first time in ages, I felt like I'd done something right. Something for me, not to please others or meet their expectations. It might not seem significant to most people, but for me, it felt like finally taking a deep breath after being underwater for years. Have you ever had one of those moments when you realize you're done being walked over? Because that's exactly what this felt like, and I've never been happier. Story 2. The title of this story is "My Brother and His Wife Lived in My House Without Paying Rent. I ruined their life since he slept with my wife in return." Hello, everyone. Prior to the start of today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Okay, Reddit. For obvious reasons, this will be a lengthy one-time narrative. I need to get this off my chest, yet I still find it hard to believe I'm putting this down. Perhaps it will save someone else from making the same errors that I did. A fair caution. Family, betrayal, infidelity, and essentially my entire life collapsing are all part of this messy tale. About a year and a half ago, my 42-year-old elder brother Mason and his wife Bella arrived at my door looking as though they had just lost everything. That's when the whole nightmare began. My age is 39. We have a 15-year-old kid named Noah, a 37-year-old wife named Rachel, and our golden retriever, Max. We lived quite a nice life. You know, a good home in a good area, a reliable job that covers the bills. Nothing spectacular, but comfortable. The typical suburbia fare. Mason has always been the stereotypical elder brother who achieves success. That's what everyone believed anyhow. He was the perfect child who could do no wrong, even when we were little. Had a habit of entering spaces as though he owned them, talking extensively about his finances and business endeavors. The earth he stepped on was essentially worshipped by his parents. Meanwhile, I was the quiet brother who simply did his own thing. However, I didn't mind it. That way, there's less pressure. Thus, there was clearly a problem when Mason and Bella arrived that day. Mason wore a wrinkled button-up that had clearly not been ironed in weeks, giving the impression that he hadn't slept in days. It was strange since Bella, who is normally rather talkative, was standing behind him, silent as a mouse. Our kitchen table was where they sat. Mason began to describe how his company had failed while Noah was in school and Rachel was at work. He said he had been cheated by the economy. Suppliers failed to deliver, and investors abruptly withdrew. Almost all of the justifications in existence. They had lost everything: their house, their mortgage, everything. Even though Bella had a remote bookkeeping job, it wasn't enough to support them. Mason insisted that all they needed was a place to stay for a few weeks while he worked things out. I won't tell lies. I was willing to aid them without hesitation, as if he were my big brother. That's what family does, you know? When bad things happen, we support one another. In addition, we had a spare room that was essentially gathering dust. It was formerly Noah's playhouse when he was younger, but today it serves mostly as storage for antique furniture and sporadic Christmas decorations. At first, our golden Max was quite happy to have new visitors in the house. He is one of those dogs that believes that every person entering the house is there to give him a pet. When we were youngsters and had a family dog, Mason used to get along well with him. I assumed it would be all right. But Noah was another matter. He is a very normal adolescent who mostly uses the internet to play games or interact with his pals. He simply shrugged and returned to his game when we informed him that his aunt and uncle would be staying with us for a bit. And I'm a teenager? In a strange way, the first few days were pleasant. Bella assisted Rachel in preparing dinner. It was almost like an extended family vacation when Mason and I would go on nightly walks with Max. However, they quickly set up in the spare room. Compared to those who were just going to be there for a few weeks, they brought a lot more stuff. One night during the first week, Max chased fireflies around the yard as Mason and I sat on the back porch enjoying a drink. He was discussing all of the prospects he had planned and how he only needed a little time to recover. Claimed to have industry contacts, individuals who owed him favors, and so on. I purchased it in its whole. God, what a fool I was. In actuality, the first few months with Mason and Bella weren't that bad. Looking back, I can see all the warning signs, but at the time I was like, this is fine. That meme of the dog sitting in the burning home. Mason, was allegedly looking for a job throughout the day while Bella worked remotely. They weren't both early risers. On most days, they would get out of bed about 10 or 11. Since I would most likely sleep in 2 if I were unemployed, I didn't give it much thought. Mason would sit on our couch with his phone, pretending to be networking and contacting connections, while Bella would set up her laptop at our kitchen table and perform whatever bookkeeping she did. The strange thing was that initially, they did assist around the house. These extravagant dinners were prepared by Bella, but occasionally Mason would take Max for these very lengthy walks, and Rachel had to acquire all the stuff. In hindsight, those walks most likely occurred during the dubious phone conversations he was making. But once more, I was being a complete moron. We sort of changed our routine to make room for them. Around 8 in the morning, I would go to the office, and Rachel would depart for her nursing shifts. Max would spend the day relaxing with Mason and Bella, while Noah would take the bus to school. At first, that dog truly seemed to enjoy them. This is amusing. Now, taking into account the outcome. However, there were a few little details that ought to have raised red flags in my mind. Mason would drink my pricey whiskey till the wee hours of the morning. The excellent things. I only get really excited about these wild company ideas, only on certain occasions. He explained his idea for a cryptocurrency for dog owners for 2 hours one evening. His precise pitch was superior, but I don't mean Dogecoin. As he babbled on about blockchain, market penetration, and whatever other buzzwords he had picked up, I sat there nodding like a fool. Bella was more reserved while discussing their intentions to stay, but she was undoubtedly able to convey that they had no intention of departing anytime soon. Around this time, Rachel began working more night shifts, since she said the money was higher. At first, Noah and Mason really seemed to get along well. Even if Noah was still acting like a teenager, Mason would try to offer him life lessons about school, girlfriends, and other things. At least they weren't fighting or anything, but Noah would merely nod and return to his games. However, the financial position remained rather peculiar. Mason continued to boast about how he will be back on his feet any moment now, and about these significant agreements that were ready to conclude. Even though Bella's remote work appeared legitimate, they were never able to pay for groceries or utilities. I became aware that our grocery expenditures had nearly doubled. At first, Rachel didn't appear to mind purchasing more food. That's just how generous she's always been. Mason and Bella, however, had high-end preferences. Things like organic, gluten-free, and expensive coffee beans that cost more than I make in an hour would be added to our grocery list. Additionally, I observed Mason and Bella acting strangely when they believed no one was looking. One day I heard them fighting in their room when I got home early from work. Bella mentioned that one should use caution and not hurry things. Mason was all trust the plan. Everything is under control. I assumed they were discussing their financial status at the moment. In any case, things started to go south about month 4. Do you recall that I mentioned Mason was looking for a job? Yes, that was an outright falsehood. The man was no longer even making an effort. He would sleep till around 2:00 p.m. On other days, we watch YouTube videos on cryptocurrency and passive income streams loudly in our living room for the remainder of the afternoon. When I got home early one day from a dental appointment and saw him playing Call of Duty on Noah's 5, not even looking for a job on his phone or anything, just playing in his boxers at 2:00 p.m., the job issue became very clear. On a Tuesday, I questioned him about it. He spent the entire speech explaining to me why regular work is a fraud and how he was instead focusing on developing his personal brand, whatever TF it implies. Even though Bella continued to work remotely, she became strange about it, like truly strange. She began to constantly gripe about her employer. Every dinner discussion devolved into an angry tirade about her company's lack of appreciation for her knowledge or something. At first, Rachel made an effort to be encouraging, but after hearing the same grievances 50 times, even she began to appear irritated. Little things like their total cessation of grocery shopping were the first signs of the major issue. They simply assumed that Rachel and I would feed them, like if they were our children or something. Bella would passive-aggressively say things like, "The coffee isn't the brand I usually drink," or "We're out of almond milk again." For example, "Go purchase your own coffee." And let's not even discuss how they handled our area. Bella concluded that the feng shui in our living room was unfavorable, or something like, "One day, all of our furniture was moved when I got home. The couch was ideal for watching television. Since it enhances energy flow, it is now facing the opposite direction. We removed the family pictures off the walls, as they were interfering with the room's organic flow. I wish this were a lie." Around this same period, Max also began to act quite strangely. Previously sleeping in the living room, he began camped out in Noah's room. Mason and Bella also got into a heated argument, like shouting bouts at 2 in the morning, rattling walls. It's a little intense. They would quarrel about the silliest things. Naturally, it was money's time to clean the dishes, something neither of them ever did. Why Mason's business goals were being undermined by Bella. They once got into a heated argument about Mason using Bella's unique coffee mug. I'm serious. Here's what truly annoyed me though. Noah began to be treated as if he were their personal servant. "Can you get me some water, Noah? Noah. For us, go walk Max. Why don't you use your allowance to get us some pizza, Noah?" My child is 15 years old. The worst part too. If he replied no or was preoccupied with his homework, they would become quite upset. Additionally, the financial situation was becoming absurd. Mason began by discussing the loans. "Always start with tiny quantities. Can I get $20 for petrol, bro? My spotting is $50 through Friday. Never made a single repayment." Then, the sum began to increase. He once had the audacity to request $500 from me for an investment opportunity that was sure to be profitable. By this time, Rachel was working insane hours, several overtime and night shifts. Said it was because the money was fantastic and they needed nurses. Now though, I wonder whether she was only attempting to avoid going home. You can't hold her responsible. To be honest, the atmosphere in the house was poisonous. Then, one morning, Bella came downstairs sniffling and red-eyed, saying she had been fired and her firm was reorganizing. She continued by saying that she had given them everything and that it was so unfair, as if she hadn't scrolled at my kitchen table for half of her workdays. Mason rubbed her back while seeming to be a supportive spouse, but as soon as she turned away, he rolled his eyes. "Really good, dude." Bella simply grabbed my coffee mug and said something about needing a mental reset first, instead of discussing finding a new job. Of course, I tried to remain optimistic and continued telling myself it was only temporary. But, wow, the indications were all there. Mason wasn't trying to get employment. My house felt like it was being overrun by the worst house guests in the world, and Bella was becoming more entitled every day. Oh, and don't forget Max's strange ways. Sometimes, especially when Mason would get home late at night, he began to snarl at Mason. I was too preoccupied with trying to be the nice brother to follow my dog's instincts. My house felt like it wasn't even mine after the 5th month. Have you ever been in someone else's house and been really careful not to take up too much room or touch their belongings? I felt like way in my own fucking home. By that time, Mason and Bella had essentially taken over. I had to park my car on the street since the garage issue grew so horrible. On one occasion, a neighbor's child riding their bike struck it. Additionally, the first requested that Mason move some of their belongings so that I could park inside once more. He spent the entire lesson explaining to me the importance of their belongings and the need for families to be more understanding. Inventory for the business. The kitchen turned into Bella's space. She would spend hours in the kitchen preparing these intricate dishes, and she would become irate if someone entered while she was working because it interfered with her workflow. The financial situation totally spiraled out of control. Mason even stopped acting as though he would reimburse me. He would simply approach me and say, "Hey buddy, I'm going to need about $200, and then expect me to give it to him. No justification, no payback schedule, nothing. I once witnessed him purchasing pricey whiskey at the liquor shop, immediately after informing me that he needed money for necessary prescription drugs. He couldn't bear being near my kids, so they started having supper in his room. He would listen to Mason's lengthy lectures about deference to elders. They would leap to do anything they wanted whenever Noah didn't. When they were living rent-free and making no contributions, Bella would make these disparaging remarks about his grades and how much time he spent playing video games, as if they had the right to criticize. Oh, and take this. They began entertaining friends. I have dinner parties at my place without asking, not just one or two people. When I attempted to talk to Mason about it, I once arrived home to find 8 strangers in my living room, sipping my fine scotch and enjoying a feast Bella had made with ingredients Rachel had purchased that morning. He just remarked, "Come on, bro, lighten up," while laughing. "We're connecting." What are the connections for? His made-up company. He was just making contact with the bottoms of my bottles of booze. Rachel and I had another argument one evening after a long day of juggling Mason and Bella. I don't understand their continued presence. I rubbed my temples as I spoke. We decided that this was only temporary. How much longer are we expected to remain sympathetic to their plight? Already irritated, Rachel groaned. "That's not that easy," she stated. "Right now, they have nowhere else to go. Hurry up." "That is untrue," I fired back. "Mason could have a friend to stay with. Bella is still employed. They aren't defenseless. All they need is more time." She was adamant. "How come you're so inflexible about this?" "Because, Rachel, it's been months. In the meanwhile, you have also been behaving strangely. You never really state which unit you're working in, and your timetable is always shifting." "What's that about?" Her entire body stiffened. "Why are you questioning me now?" She lost her temper. "As I previously said, the hospital has been relocating me." "Yes. What unit?" I pushed. Even though she hesitated for a moment, it was sufficient. "Does it really make a difference?" Crossing her arms, she fired back. "I don't have to report to you every day, God. My red flag should have been that reluctance." However, I was too preoccupied with entertaining my freeloading brother and his wife, and attempting to prevent my own home from turning into a full-fledged circus to see that I was missing something enormous. By this time, Noah was completely checked out. You can't hold him responsible. Imagine living with your aunt and uncle as their personal servants when you were 15 years old. I heard Mason tell him one day that video games are for losers and that he need to adopt a genuine interest instead. This is from a 42-year-old man who played with my sons and watched cryptocurrency YouTubers for the most of the day. 5. Max had a habit of complaining to Rachel whenever she got home from her night shifts while Noah was in school. This was a sorrowful, anxious sound instead of his typical, cheerful dog whine. He's normally the happiest dog alive, so it was rather strange for him to follow her around the house with his tail down. I thought he was simply noticing the tension in the home, but I was mistaken. In relation to Rachel, she became quite jittery about her phone. She would really carry it to the restroom. It was never left laying about, claimed that she had to be accessible for work-related crises. However, when was that degree of privacy necessary for nurses? Once more, I was acting like a total moron. Mason's actions become even more absurd. At around 6 in the morning, he began working out in our living room while loudly listening to his motivating podcast. He started talking about how success will inspire people to wake up early and how we should be grateful to him for bringing great energy into the home when I urged him to quiet down since others were sleeping. Rachel and Noah were scheduled to undertake their monthly baking activity one weekend. Somehow, it felt like a particular moment for them to bond. Together, they would watch movies and bake a bunch of cookies. But Bella had it all under control when they entered the kitchen. She was preparing some sort of dinner for her imaginary culinary blog. In fact, Rachel made an effort to be kind about it, asked whether it would be possible for them to share the area. "You can do it another time," Bella murmured, waving her away as if she were chasing a fly. "I'm engaged in a significant task." I was killed by the expression on Noah's face, Guy. Without a word, he simply turned around and returned to his room. For once, Rachel was truly angry when she went to bed that night. She was so laid back about things most of the time. I now see why. She was angry this time, though. "This must end," she remarked. "Everything is being ruined by them." Rich is coming from her, taking a look back. I was just relieved that someone else was finally expressing it, though. At the moment, when Mason and Bella began discussing moving their company into our basement, it was the last straw for me. They intended to turn the game area at my home office into their startup headquarters or something similar. Mason really attempted to guilt trip me when I said no by bringing up how our parents had allowed us to use the basement when we were kids and how I used to play down there all the time. Growing up, we didn't even have a basement. We shared an apartment. He was so accustomed to lying that he was unable to remember his own early years. To avoid coming home, I started staying late at work. I was sitting in the parking lot of my car, browsing Reddit, trying all I could to avoid going into that disaster. Max appeared to be depressed as well. He stopped showing off his toys and instead stayed in the corners of rooms. But one morning, everything was different. Things progressed from being awful to being really screwed up. I was preparing to go to work. Max was clamoring for bacon as usual, while Noah was enjoying breakfast. Bella, who appeared to have been up all night, walked downstairs with this enormous luggage. Mason was still unconscious, most likely dozing off after another night of my alcohol consumption. For a minute, Bella remained still in our kitchen, gazing at her coffee cup, the one she had been so enamored with. Then she says, "I can't do this anymore," after glancing at me. While I'm attempting to prepare my morning coffee, he just drops that bomb. She must have meant to live with us. It would have been fantastic news at that time, to be honest. However, no. She breaks down in tears, but these are tears of rage. After glancing at Noah, I left. "I apologize, child." Strange. Took her keys and simply walked away. Didn't even shut the door after leaving. There was no sound from Max, who generally growls at everything that moves. Sat there with this expression on his face as he watched her go. As in, at last. That dog was aware of everything before any of us were, I promise. Around midday, Mason eventually dragged himself downstairs. Who in their 40s sleeps till noon, really? When Bella left, he behaved strangely, as if he were too calm. A man whose wife just left would probably be panicking out, yet he's not. "She'll be back," he remarked with a simple shrug. "She's most likely exaggerating." However, she did not return. Not on that particular day, not tomorrow, nothing. Mason continued to pretend as though it didn't matter, began to stay out late, arriving home at strange hours, smelling as though he had taken a cologne bath. I reasoned that he may be drinking away his troubles or something. God, I was a fool. After Bella left, Rachel's actions became even more bizarre. Changed her phone password, began working even more nights, and began receiving these texts that made her grin. I have never previously seen it. Red flag 3472, which I foolishly disregarded. In fact, Noah seems glad that Bella was no longer there. Began using the kitchen more frequently and leaving his room, but he continued to give Mason strange stares, particularly when Rachel left for her shifts or Mason returned home late at night. After Bella departed, Mason really had the audacity to beg me for more money. I'd see him the next day purchasing pricey stuff from Amazon or wearing new clothing, even though he claimed to need funds for divorce attorneys or whatever. Then the strange late-night activities began. Around 3 a.m., I would awaken to get water or whatever. Rachel's car would be in the driveway, even though she was meant to be at work, and Mason would not be home. The next day, I would question her about it. She would become defensive and say things like we were overstaffed, or I got sent home early. 2 weeks or so after Bella's departure, I began to see connections between things like Rachel and Mason using their phones simultaneously and grinning at whatever they were reading, or how they would both depart for smoke breaks. Rachel stopped smoking years ago, but I was still too stupid to understand it all. I was mentally creating excuses all the time. Perhaps they were simply handling stress in different ways. Given that Mason was still unemployed, it's possible that Rachel was taking on more employment to help pay the expenses. The home felt odd without Bella, so perhaps Max was simply being strange. I once woke up at approximately 2 in the morning. Rachel wasn't in bed either. Downstairs, I heard voices. I assumed she had just arrived home early from work once more. I didn't give it much thought until I heard someone laughing in a flirtatious way. Max moaned gently from his bed in the corner while I lay there in bed, looking at the ceiling. He was probably attempting to let me know what was going on, but I wasn't prepared to accept it yet. 2 weeks following Bella's recovery, my phone buzzed while I pretended to be interested in spreadsheets while I was at work. Bella texted me about it. I could hardly open it since my hands were shaking so much. "We must speak, not via text. Are you able to meet me?" My stomach fell into my shoes at that point. Have you ever had the sensation that something you're going to hear is going to permanently alter your life? Yes, that. This coffee cafe across town is where we first met. It appeared as though Bella had not slept for days. The sweatshirt she had on when she left was still on her. She also had trembling hands. Worse than I am. I have something to show you. Taking out her phone, she said. I apologize as well. Guys, I'm so fucking sorry. I can't even comprehend what she showed me. All right, take a deep breath. Images. Dozens of them. Mason and Rachel together. It's like being together, not just hanging around. In my fucking bed. Together. In my home. While I was working. When Noah was upstairs. Time markings that date back. Several months. Hundreds of them received texts. Every night shift. Yes, those weren't shifts at the hospital. Rachel and Mason had been getting together in a budget hotel near the highway. Rachel's schedule abruptly altered all those times. My brother was with her. Bella had apparently known for weeks. She departed for that reason. She had confronted Mason after learning about their romance. And did you hear what that jerk said? It simply occurred. We had no choice. Couldn't resist. Such as, for months, you unintentionally had several sexual encounters with your brother's wife. My entire world collapsed as I sat there in that coffee shop, gazing at Bella's phone. It's likely that the barista believed I was suffering a stroke. Bella said, "There's more," as there was undoubtedly more. It becomes out that Mason and Rachel had been preparing to flee together. They were holding off till they had saved up enough cash, most likely all the money they had been stealing from me. How ironic is that? Of all locations, they intended to relocate to fucking Florida. Had everything planned, even a chosen apartment. I was dazed as I drove home, nearly struck a mailbox. Continued to reflect on Max, Noah, and all the clues I had overlooked. Max snarled at Mason. The peculiar work schedule of Rachel. The smoke breaks in the late hours of the night. I was so damned blind, God. Mason was splayed out on my couch, watching TV, when I arrived home. Rachel was at her job. I simply stood and gazed at him. I felt nothing for this person who was meant to be my brother. Simply empty. He then had the audacity to approach me and request money. For delivery. For what length of time? I questioned him. He appeared momentarily perplexed. Then his face broke into a smile. A damned sneer. As if all of this were a huge joke. He truly laughed, Bella told you. Look, dude, these things do occur. I just clicked with Rachel. You've put in a lot of work. She felt alone. I can't really recall what transpired after that. When Noah heard the shouting, he rushed downstairs and said, I just started laughing like hysterical laughing. I then gave Rachel a call. On the first ring, she responded. Most likely believed it to be Mason. Now come home. I only stated that. I suppose that night duty wasn't that crucial after all when she arrived home 20 minutes later. She didn't even try to refute it after glancing at Mason's expression. Simply stood there looking strangely composed, while I went utterly crazy. How were you able to? I asked again and again. He's my brother. My brother, for crying out loud. Do you know what she said? You never return home. Mason knows what I mean. This was not what we intended to occur. Noah listened to everything. My 15-year-old had to listen to his mother's attempt to defend fucking his uncle. Max was racing between us, barking and acting irrationally, as if he were attempting to defuse a quarrel. Mason made an effort to remain composed. This leaning back was only another example of his fluid speech patterns. He added, Look, man, these things happen in families. This is something we can resolve. When he chose to toss the match into the gasoline, I was still trying to comprehend the full insolence of it. He grinned. I really grinned and replied, Perhaps this wouldn't have occurred if you had been a better husband. I lost it at that point. Before I knew what I was doing, I sprang at him, pushing him back so hard that he slammed into the side table and knocked down a lamp. With the blood screaming in my ears, I could hardly hear Max's barking. Mason clambered to his feet, his hands up as if he were an innocent bystander to the whole situation. This is how you've always been. I spit, continually making mistakes and expecting others to clean up your mess. As well as parents. They gave you permission. Your entire damn existence was spent being pampered by them. Made one excuse after another, but I had to take responsibility. And now this. My spouse. My fucking spouse. Mason. Mason seemed more irritated than guilty as he wiped his lips. You're going overboard. Are you overreacting? I chuckled. I'm overreacting because you're having an affair with my wife in my home. Are you truly this hallucinogenic? Rachel attempted to put herself in our way, voice cracking, hands trembling. Let's simply please. No, I yelled, glaring at her while maintaining eye contact with Mason. This cannot be resolved by you. Here, you don't get to cry and act like the victim. Mason had the audacity to appear insulted. We're family, man. Come on. We ought to. We ought to. What? Give it a hug. Enjoy a pleasant little heart-to-heart. You are no longer my brother. Both of you, get the fuck out. Rachel started crying uncontrollably as she tried to beg me. I need time to speak with Noah and Pac. When you chose to rape Noah's uncle, you forfeited all right to explain anything to him. I said icily. Mason stood up. He said, "This is why she wanted me. You're really inflexible. So dramatic." He had the common sense to back off when I took another stride in his direction. "I'll burn your crap if you don't take it," I said in a calm, quiet voice. "Where you go doesn't matter to me. Simply leave." Mason scowled but refrained from pressing the issue. Instead, cursing beneath his breath, he snatched up his keys and rushed out. For a brief moment, Rachel paused as if she believed there was still hope, but I just turned my back on her. A minute later, she was gone. Mason and his vehicle, hers and Rachel's, most likely going directly to their preferred accommodation. Noah shut himself in his chamber. Max spent the whole night curled up outside his door, whimpering gently. I stood amid the ruins of my living room, surrounded by shattered memories and betrayed trust, wondering how in the world my life had devolved into such a disaster. And, well, everything went down about 8 months ago. Both positive and negative changes have occurred. I suppose it's all essential. It was a messy divorce. Like seeing a slow-motion train accident, Rachel attempted to seize the house and half of everything else. Do you think that's possible? In fact, her attorney attempted to claim that I was somewhat to blame for her affair with Mason, because by allowing them to live with us, I established an atmosphere that encouraged their bond. Yes, I'm a fool for letters, checks, and supporting my brother in times of need. Fortunately, none of that bullshit was convincing the court when their affair's proof surfaced. Bella, I appreciate you saving those texts. Rachel's argument essentially fell apart. The only silver lining in this whole fiasco, to be honest, was that she ended up with far less than she had desired. In fact, Mason and Rachel made an effort to sort things out in Florida. The duration was around 3 months. It turns out that lying and betrayal are not good building blocks for relationships. Who could have known? Last week, I received a text from Rachel claiming that Mason had cheated on her with a bartender at the beach club, where he eventually found employment. Karma is a bitch. She wanted to discuss mending our relationship with Noah and me. I didn't read her. Certain things are simply unfixable. Noah. I was never as powerful as that child at his age, man. He attends counseling twice a week. Rachel attempted to argue with me about having to pay for it. That's a really fantastic mom of the year. In fact, he's doing better than I anticipated. His grades have improved, and he is once again spending time with his pals. Rachel's attempt to obtain joint custody was the most difficult aspect. Noah informed the judge up front that he wanted to live with me full-time. When he stated that, you ought to have seen Rachel's expression. I believe she finally realized it at that point. What? She had truly lost. We left the previous residence, a lot of unpleasant recollections, discovered a more compact location near Noah's school. In fact, it's superior. A large backyard for Max, reduced expenses, and less area to clean. Speaking of Max, he is currently leading the finest life possible. The house is free of strange tension. No more needing to stay away from specific individuals. He has returned to his joyful, silly self. Strangely enough, Bella and I stay in touch. Not in that manner. Don't think about it. Sometimes we just check in, verify the other's well-being. She relocated to Seattle, found a legitimate work as a bookkeeper, and began seeing a man who made her handmade furniture or other nice things. A few weeks ago, Mason made an effort to apologize by sending a lengthy text explaining that he was going through a difficult time and that he never intended to cause harm to anyone, stated his desire to restore our fraternity. I banned his number and sent back a photo of my middle finger. The truly insane portion. Last month, Mason and Rachel both attempted to add me on LinkedIn. For example, what did they anticipate happening? I apologize for fucking your brother. The wife desires a network. Get twisted. It was difficult for mom and dad. They are in their 70s. The last thing they needed was turmoil like this. However, they've been fantastic with Noah. He goes fishing with his dad every other weekend. Rachel never bothered to teach him how to cook, but now his mother is doing it for him. For my part, I'm doing all right. Began attending the gym. I know it's standard Reddit advice, but it's helpful. Received a raise at work. It turns out that you can concentrate on your profession when you're not wasting all of your energy on poisonous individuals. Having a date? Yes. As it happens, I wasn't as cut off to it as I had assumed. It began slowly. I met this woman in the gym, and we are now having coffee. At first, nothing major. Only two individuals conversing. There is no pressure. One coffee, however, led to several late-night strolls. Before I realized it, I was genuinely excited to see her. Alyssa is her name. She's witty, intelligent, and doesn't tolerate rudeness, which is very refreshing after everything. When I'm being obstinate, she calls me out in a way that somehow makes it feel more like a challenge than a disagreement. Noah also likes her, which is really important. After all that happened, he has been cautious around strangers. But as soon as she stepped in the door, he started joking with her and Max. Instant approbation and tail wags. I only needed that assurance. I have established routines with Noah. Every morning we eat breakfast together. Previously, we had no time for it. Some of his video games are being taught to me. I believe he takes pleasure in seeing me fail, even if I still stink. On the weekends, we really started baking our own pizza. It's little, but it counts. Alyssa occasionally joins us as well. It seems normal, simple, no nonsense, no drama, simply nice company. Max still spends the most of his evenings in Noah's room. It makes them both feel safer, in my opinion. All along, the goodest boy was aware. We ought to have heard him out sooner. I noticed Mason's vehicle at a petrol station last week. He failed to notice me. He had a rugged appearance, unshaven in that beach bar's rumpled outfit. Seeing him like that made me want to feel gratified, but primarily I felt nothing. That's advancement, correct? So indeed, that is the current situation. Now, life is different. Different isn't necessarily a negative thing, though. Noah's recovery. I'm getting better. Max is content. And I'm genuinely excited about what's coming up for the first time in a long time. Thank you for all of the prizes, but instead, please consider making a donation to your local animal shelter. Max was rescued, and their work is incredible. Edit. The unique coffee cup is still here. You cannot purchase it. The last update for everyone who inquired. Yes, I have a lawyer, installed cameras in the new residence, and changed all of my passwords. The tip from Reddit did work this time.